The stars above Earth burned cold and silent as the alien fleet slid into orbit like a dark wall. Dozens of massive warships hovered in formation, their hulls glowing with the light of distant suns. These invaders had conquered a dozen worlds before this one. They had crushed empires, burned colonies, and made proud civilizations kneel. Their commanders stood in the war room, staring down at the blue and green sphere below with cruel smiles on their faces. They saw a planet covered in forests, water, and cities built by what they believed to be weak creatures. To them, Earth was not a threat, it was a trophy waiting to be claimed. No one had ever dared to invade a Class 15 Deathworld before, and that alone should have been a warning. But they didn't believe in warnings. They believed in their power. Their commander-in-chief, tall and armored in silver, raised one clawed hand and gave the invasion order. The fleet answered with the roar of engines and burning thrusters as hundreds of dropships detached from the main ships like a rain of fire. They burned through the atmosphere, cutting through the clouds in perfect lines, landing across continents and oceans. Alien soldiers marched in disciplined formation, armed with energy rifles that had ended countless wars. They expected screaming humans, they expected panic, they expected a quick surrender. But when their boots hit the ground, they were greeted with silence. The streets were empty. Buildings stood tall but quiet. Parks stretched wide but no children played in them. Highways stretched far but carried no cars. No civilians ran, no soldiers resisted. It was as if the planet had been abandoned. The aliens scanned the area again and again, but all they saw were ghosts. Empty cities, dark windows, and streets without sound. The commanders watched the live feeds from their orbiting war room. Their second-in-command laughed, calling humans cowards who ran before the fight began. Another officer joked that it would be the easiest conquest in galactic history. They didn't realize that silence on a Class 15 Deathworld was not a gift. It was a warning. The alien dropships spread like a net, deploying thousands of soldiers across major human cities. They moved through empty streets with loud boots and careless laughter. They didn't bother setting up heavy defenses. Why would they? To them, this was a hunt where the prey didn't even show up. Their scanners picked up strange energy fluctuations in some places, short, sharp signals that disappeared before they could be traced. A few squads reported seeing flickers of movement in the shadows, but the commanders dismissed it as nerves. On the ground, in a dark subway tunnel beneath one of the cities, something moved. Silent, controlled, watching. Human eyes scanned through night vision goggles, tracking the alien patrol above. Trained hands gripped rifles wrapped in black fabric to muffle any sound. These weren't frightened civilians. These were humans who had learned how to hunt. Earth had been invaded before. Humanity had fought wars against itself for centuries. It had bled, burned, rebuilt, and adapted. Humanity didn't panic anymore. Humanity planned. One alien unit marched into a shopping district where banners still hung from windows. The air was cold, heavy, and unmoving. Their squad leader clicked his communicator, ordering a scan. No heat signatures appeared, but what they didn't know was that humans were underneath them, in basements, tunnels, and sewers, watching, waiting, learning every movement. The silence wasn't fear. It was strategy. In orbit, the alien commander leaned over the hollow table, tapping the image of Earth with a sharp finger. "Begin the occupation," he ordered in his deep, growling voice. "Secure their communications, shut down their defenses, and make this world ours." His officers obeyed with pride, sending waves of coded commands to their soldiers on the surface. They didn't notice the patterns forming in the reports. Patrols were moving slower. Contact with some squads was delayed. A few dropships had gone quiet. A handful of ground sensors had stopped transmitting. In one forest landing zone, an alien battalion stood between towering pines, scanning the area for heat signatures. The forest floor was damp. Fog curled around their legs. One soldier thought he heard something behind the trees, but when he turned, there was nothing. Another soldier saw a faint flicker of light on a hill, but it vanished. The commander ordered them forward. A minute later, a single sharp crack echoed through the fog, a sound that didn't belong to alien weapons. The squad leader fell before he hit the ground. No one saw the shooter. No one saw anything. The forest fell silent again, and the alien unit tightened their formation. Their commander barked orders, but their comms crackled. One by one, their helmets flickered with static. The fog thickened. From the trees, human shapes moved like shadows, careful and silent. No words were spoken. No mercy was given. Back in the alien war room, a junior officer approached the commander. "Sir," he said nervously, "we've lost contact with Recon Unit 73. The commander waved him off. "They're probably lost in the terrain," he growled. "This is a death world. It's dangerous. Stay focused." He didn't ask why the signal cut so fast. He didn't ask how trained soldiers could vanish in seconds. Down on the surface, more patrols vanished into empty cities. One team entered a subway station and never came out. Another followed faint heat signatures into an abandoned factory, and their signal blinked out 5 seconds after crossing the door. The aliens began deploying search drones, but even the drones didn't return. Something was swallowing their forces piece by piece, silently, like the night itself was alive. One alien captain stood on a rooftop, looking down at the city they thought they had conquered. Their soldiers were scattered, isolated, cut off from each other. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Every other world they invaded had fallen in hours. The humans should have been begging for mercy by now. But the humans weren't begging. They were invisible, and that was far worse. In the darkness below the captain's feet, human special forces moved like predators. They communicated through silent hand signals, their faces painted black, their rifles steady. Every move they made was planned. Every kill was quiet. Earth wasn't just defending itself. It was hunting. By nightfall, the alien fleet reported more losses. Patrols were missing. Drones had stopped returning. Small fires burned in places they didn't understand. Panic had not yet reached the commanders, but unease had. The second-in-command leaned closer to the screen. "Where are they?" he whispered. "YD, don't we see them?" The commander's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The next morning, when the sun rose over the blue oceans of Earth, the invaders expected to see a world bowed to them. Instead, they saw their own forces thinned, communications fractured, supply lines already under threat. They didn't realize it yet, but their first mistake was already made. They thought Earth was soft. They thought humanity would break. But Earth had been forged in chaos. In the forests, the mountains, the cities, and the oceans, the humans were ready. They had watched silently as the ships descended, counted the soldiers, marked the weak points, and learned their enemy's pattern. The aliens had walked into a war they didn't understand. A Class 15 Deathworld was not a battlefield. It was a trap, a living nightmare wrapped in beauty. And at the center of that nightmare, humanity was waiting. As the alien commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the silent planet below, something twisted deep in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but something colder. He didn't know why, but for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of the silence pressing back. He didn't know that below, in the shadows of the cities they thought were conquered, thousands of human soldiers were already moving. They didn't wear bright uniforms. They didn't shout or march. They stalked. They hunted. The commander turned away, confident in his firepower, blind to the storm beneath him. And on the surface of Earth, in the ruins of a subway station, a human fighter lifted a rifle, stared through the scope, and whispered, "Welcome to hell." The silence wasn't peace. It was the sound of Earth waiting. And soon, the invaders would understand what it meant to invade a Class 15 Deathworld. Not because humanity ran, but because humanity never did. The invasion was supposed to be simple. That was what the alien commanders told themselves as the second day began. Their ships hovered above the planet like a wall of steel, their banners flashing across the sky, their soldiers deployed in every continent. They had crushed dozens of worlds like this before. The first night was always chaotic, but by the second morning, they usually controlled everything. But this wasn't any other world. This was a Class 15 Deathworld. And this time, when the sun rose, nothing followed their plan. Their patrols were smaller, their communications were slower, and most of all, their soldiers were quieter. Units that were loud and arrogant the day before now marched with unease in their steps. The silence of the humans had started to dig into their minds like a needle. The alien commanders sat around a circular hollow table in the war room, the blue projection of Earth floating in front of them. They watched as red dots representing their units blinked on the map. There were too many gaps. Dozens of squads were late in reporting. Several signals had gone completely dark. One commander slammed a metal fist on the table, demanding answers, but none came. The communications officer spoke in a low, uncertain voice. "We've lost contact with 23 patrol teams in the northern continent," he said. "Satellite coverage shows no enemy movement, no explosions, no gunfire." The commander narrowed his glowing yellow eyes. No gunfire meant no resistance. No resistance meant something worse. It meant the humans weren't reacting. They were preparing. Down on the surface, alien soldiers marched through abandoned cities. Their boots echoed on cracked pavement. Banners of conquest fluttered from dropships parked in streets. But something felt wrong. Windows stared down at them like hollow eyes. Empty cars sat in the middle of the roads. Shops were silent. Schools were locked. It was as if the entire population had melted away into the ground. Their scanners picked up faint signals here and there, but they were fast, short, almost like ghosts brushing against the edges of their systems. One squad moved through a subway entrance, weapons raised. They found only flickering lights and damp air. They walked deeper into the tunnels, unaware of the human figures watching them from the shadows, moving silently behind them like predators following prey. The aliens never even saw the flash of metal before their signals disappeared from the war map forever. Reports began flooding in. Not large battles, not explosions, just silence. Patrols gone missing, transport convoys failing to arrive, outposts no longer responding. A captain reported that a storage facility of energy cells had been stripped clean during the night, not blown up, taken, as if someone had walked in, dismantled their defenses without a sound, and vanished before sunrise. It didn't make sense. On every other planet, resistance screamed loudly before dying. But here, they didn't even see the faces of their enemy. They had come expecting war. Instead, they had found something worse, humans who didn't fight fair. One alien lieutenant stood on top of a crumbling building, looking down at the empty streets below. His helmet picked up faint thermal readings. They were moving, but not in any pattern he understood. They were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. He barked orders, sending half his squad to flank the readings, but the moment they turned the corner, their comms snapped into static. One sharp gunshot echoed, then silence. When the rest of the squad reached the area, they found nothing. No humans, no blood, not even bodies. The enemy had erased them like they were never there. In the command ship, unease spread like smoke. The second-in-command stared at the map with furrowed brows. "Where are they?" he whispered. "Why don't they fight us directly?" No one answered him. These invaders were used to overwhelming their enemies with speed and firepower. They were not built to fight a ghost. But that's exactly what humanity had become. Millions of ghosts that moved through tunnels, forests, and ruined cities like smoke, striking fast and vanishing before anyone could react. As the day stretched on, the alien troops began to change. They walked slower. Their voices on the comms were lower. They no longer laughed about weak humans. They whispered to each other about missing friends and patrols. Every dark alley felt dangerous. Every shadow could be a trap. Fear crept into their armor like cold water. One alien sergeant ordered a patrol through an abandoned hospital. It looked like a ruin, but the moment they entered, their lights began to flicker. They moved deeper, shouting to stay information. But the humans were already inside, moving along the ceiling beams like shadows. When the aliens reached the third floor, their signals blinked out one by one. The only thing left was the faint sound of boots on the broken floor. Night fell again, and the aliens were no longer laughing. They started locking down their dropships, forming tight circles around their bases. They deployed scanning drones, thermal detectors, motion sensors, but nothing could catch what they couldn't see. Humans didn't attack in waves. They attacked like whispers. One soldier alone in a watchtower disappeared without a sound. A dropship exploded at midnight because someone had crawled inside its belly hours earlier. A communication relay station went offline when the power grid was cut at the exact second their satellites rotated away. This wasn't random. It was planned, calculated, and it terrified them. Inside one of the command centers on the ground, a group of alien officers gathered, their voices low. One of them pointed at the feed from a helmet camera. Static, flickering images of a dark forest, a flash of something human, then black. "We are not fighting farmers," he muttered. "These creatures are organized." Another spat angrily, calling humans savages. But none of them could deny what was happening. They had the numbers. They had the weapons. And still they were losing control. Not in big explosions, but in quiet, sharp, surgical cuts that left them bleeding slowly. In the shadows beneath their feet, humanity was moving like one living creature. Soldiers in black suits crawled through maintenance tunnels, set traps in abandoned buildings, and mapped every alien patrol route. Entire cities had been emptied before the invasion began. Their people moved underground into deep shelters and bunkers. The surface wasn't abandoned. It was prepared. Every window could hide a sniper. Every sewer could hold a squad. Every forest could swallow a battalion whole. The alien commander leaned forward over the holomap, frustration boiling behind his calm mask. "I want those humans found," he growled. "I want their cities under control." But his voice carried more anger than confidence now. He had expected a frightened enemy. Instead, he was fighting something patient, silent, and invisible. The first cracks in their arrogance had already formed. By the third night, the soldiers on the ground started turning on their own lights in the dark, something they had mocked human armies for doing in past wars. Some refused to patrol alone. Some whispered about shapes watching them from rooftops. The commanders called it fear. But it wasn't fear born from nothing. It was fear born from reality. They had stepped onto a death world without understanding what that word meant. On Earth, everything that survives learns to be dangerous. The storms, the creatures, the land itself, it shapes those who live on it. And humans were its most dangerous creation. While the alien army wrapped itself in technology and pride, humanity wrapped itself in shadows and patience. They didn't need to fight hard. They just needed to let the invaders keep walking forward until the trap snapped shut. The alien commander didn't know it yet, but this was no longer an invasion. It was a slow hunt, and the hunters were not them. It was the humans, and they were already too deep inside the lion's den to turn back. The third night fell heavy and thick over Earth like a hunting cloak. The alien invaders, who had once marched through cities with laughter in their voices and pride in their steps, now moved like shadows themselves, but not because they wanted to. They were scared. Their armor sensors were glitching more often. Their patrols were shrinking, and the reports kept coming in short bursts of static, fragments of screams, then nothing. In the war room aboard the flagship, the alien commander paced with restless claws tapping on the metal floor. He stared at the map of Earth and the blinking red markers that represented his forces. There were fewer blinking lights now. Too many had gone dark. His officers pretended everything was under control, but the silence between their words told the truth. They were losing soldiers without even seeing their enemy. They had walked into something they didn't understand. On the surface, an alien platoon advanced through the ruins of a large city. Their boots crushed broken glass with every step, their lights cutting narrow paths through the dark. Their scanners picked up movement on every corner, but nothing stayed on their screens long enough to target. Their commander barked orders, telling them to stay tight, to hold formation. But in the spaces between buildings, human eyes watched them. On the rooftops, behind shattered windows, and in the subway tunnels below, human squads moved in silence. No lights, no noise, just breathing, just patience. One alien soldier turned to his right, sure he saw something move in the alley. He raised his weapon, scanning. Nothing. Another soldier said he heard something above them, but when they pointed their lights upward, all they saw was an empty roof. Their commander ordered them forward. But before they took 3 steps, a silent flash of light appeared between the buildings. It was fast, clean, sharp. A bullet cut through the fog and found the weak point of his armor. The alien dropped before anyone saw where the shot came from. The others screamed and fired in every direction, but there was nothing there. The shot came from nowhere, and then the silence returned. The aliens regrouped and dragged the body back, their voices shaking through their comms. Their commander called for drone support, but the drones sent out ahead had already gone offline. The sky was too quiet, the city too still. One by one, their soldiers started turning their lights outward, pointing their rifles at shadows that didn't move. What they didn't realize was that the humans had already surrounded them. Above them, below them, behind them. In another part of the city, deep in a dark industrial zone, an alien unit set up a temporary command post inside an abandoned factory. They thought the thick walls would keep them safe. They didn't notice the small cracks in the floor, the ventilation shafts big enough for a human to crawl through, or the silent footsteps moving through the shadows. A human strike team slipped inside without a sound, taking positions on the rafters above. The aliens were busy setting up their equipment, confident they were secure. One of them took off his helmet to drink water. That was when the first rope dropped from above. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a grenade. It was a silent attack. A black figure landed behind him like smoke, wrapped an arm around his neck, and dragged him away before anyone saw. No sound. No scream. The second alien disappeared a minute later. Then the third. Panic spread through the unit like wildfire. They grabbed their weapons, shouting into their comms. "We have intruders!" someone yelled. But the static answered. One by one, lights flickered out. Shadows moved like water around their feet. The survivors fired blindly, hitting nothing but walls. When reinforcements arrived 10 minutes later, they found nothing but empty armor and quiet. The entire unit had vanished. No gunfire, no signs of a battle. Just silence. In orbit, the alien commander slammed his fist on the console, demanding answers. "We have superior technology," he growled. "They have primitive weapons. How are they doing this?" His second-in-command looked pale, his hands shaking as he read the latest report. "They're not fighting us directly," he said softly. "They're hunting us." That word sent a cold chill through the war room. These were conquerors, not prey. They didn't know how to be hunted. Down on the ground, the human forces grew bolder. Entire streets were rigged with traps. Bridge supports were wired with charges. Supply convoys vanished into the fog without leaving even tire tracks behind. The aliens were used to frontal assaults, to overwhelming firepower, to easy wins. But humanity gave them none of that. Humanity bled them slowly. Humanity cut their lines quietly. Humanity moved like the planet itself had joined the fight. One alien captain, stationed in a ruined skyscraper, stared out the cracked windows at the empty city below. He had once thought of humans as weak creatures with soft skin and fragile bones. But after 3 nights of losing soldiers to shadows, he no longer felt that way. He couldn't see them. He couldn't track them. He could only feel their presence, like predators circling prey. He turned to speak to his lieutenant, but the lieutenant's chair was empty. Only a broken helmet lay on the floor. His heart raced as he grabbed his weapon, backing toward the wall. A shadow moved behind him. By the time he turned, it was too late. At the same time, hundreds of similar scenes were happening across the globe. Forests swallowed whole patrols. Cities devoured armored convoys. Oceans pulled ships under the waves. Even the skies turned against them as human drones, black and silent, cut through their aircraft like knives in the dark. The alien commanders couldn't find a front line anymore. There was no front line. There was no battlefield. Humanity had turned the entire planet into a hunting ground. The alien commander called an emergency meeting. He stared at the frightened faces of his officers. None of them could explain the disappearing forces. None of them had seen the enemy with their own eyes. "Then how," he asked slowly, "are they killing us?" Silence filled the room. No one could answer, because the humans weren't just fighting, they were dismantling the invasion piece by piece without ever stepping into the light. Back on the ground, inside an old subway tunnel, a human unit knelt in the dark. Their commander spoke softly. "Don't rush them. Let them walk where we want." His voice was calm, cold. This wasn't the voice of a terrified species. It was the voice of a hunter who had waited for this moment. Humanity had lived through plagues, wars, nuclear fire, and endless chaos. They didn't fear invaders. They studied them. And now, with the aliens trapped in their own arrogance, the trap was fully set. That night, an alien base near a major landing site went silent. It was one of their strongest positions, filled with soldiers, vehicles, and weapons. But when the commander tried to contact it, no one answered. A recon ship sent down to investigate found the landing zone empty. Every gun was still there. Every vehicle was still parked. But the soldiers were gone. Not dead. Gone. For the first time, fear reached the highest level of their command. The commander stared at the map again. So many blinking lights had gone dark. Too many to ignore. They had walked onto a death world believing they were the hunters. But the moment they set foot on Earth, the roles had changed. In the darkness beneath the cities, the humans prepared for the next strike. Their faces calm, their rifles ready. This wasn't panic. This was precision. And above them, in the cold void of space, the alien commander finally felt something he hadn't felt in decades: doubt. He had conquered many worlds, but none of those worlds had ever stared back at him through the dark like Earth was now. He looked down at the silent planet and whispered the question no one wanted to answer. Where are they? The truth was simple. They were everywhere. They were watching, and they were waiting for the invaders to break. The fourth night came down like a dark hammer, and the alien commanders could feel the pressure tightening around their throats. The invasion that had begun with confident laughter was now cracking under the weight of something they could not see. In their war room aboard the flagship, the atmosphere had changed. Gone was the smug pride. Gone was the lazy arrogance. Now only tension filled the air. Red markers on their holomap blinked, and each blink meant another patrol, another squad, another company that had gone completely silent. The commander stood with his claws clenched behind his back, staring down at the image of Earth spinning slowly below. They should have broken by now, he muttered. Every world breaks by now. But Earth wasn't breaking. Earth was tightening its grip. Across the surface, alien soldiers were no longer marching through cities with straight spines and loud voices. They were huddled together in small circles, scanning rooftops and shadows, their hands shaking around their rifles. The quiet had become unbearable. They started shooting at anything that moved. Birds, trash blowing in the wind, even reflections in windows. Their nerves were snapping one by one. The hunters had become the hunted. Inside their temporary command posts, low whispers replaced their old battle chants. They no longer spoke of victory. They spoke of the disappearances, of the patrols that walked out and never came back, of the gunfire that was never heard, the bodies that were never found. Some soldiers swore they heard breathing behind walls. Others said they saw human eyes staring at them from the dark before vanishing again. In orbit, the alien second-in-command approached the main console with shaky hands. "We've lost 40% of ground communications," he reported. "Our supply routes are collapsing. Command posts are being cut off." The commander slammed his hand against the table. "Then hit them harder," he shouted. "Find them." But the officer didn't raise his voice. He just whispered the truth that everyone in the room already knew. "We can't find them." The humans were everywhere and nowhere. Their strikes were so fast that, by the time alien units reacted, it was already over. They hit supply trucks, snipers took out officers in silence, drones vanished from the sky like feathers in the wind. Every alien attempt to regroup fell apart because the humans always seemed to know exactly where they were. Every move the aliens made was met with a shadow they couldn't catch. On the surface, one alien commander set up a stronghold at the center of a large abandoned city. He surrounded himself with armored vehicles, auto turrets, scanning drones, and hundreds of soldiers. He thought if he built a fortress, the humans would finally be forced to fight openly. But the humans didn't attack the fortress directly. They attacked everything around it. Power lines went dead one after another. Ammunition trucks were taken before they got close. Watchtowers lost their spotters in the dark. By midnight, the fortress stood alone, without supply, without power, surrounded by darkness. The alien soldiers could feel it pressing in on them from every direction. They fired flares into the night, but the flares only made the darkness seem deeper when they burned out. Inside that fortress, soldiers huddled around small lamps, whispering nervously. One said he saw a human climbing the wall like a shadow. Another claimed the humans were using the sewers to get inside. The commander yelled at them to stay calm, but even he felt it. The weight of something circling them, patient and silent. A single gunshot rang out, and one of the sentries fell from the wall. Then another. Then silence. Back in orbit, the alien fleet detected strange electronic activity from the surface, short bursts of signals, perfectly timed, spread across multiple continents. Human communications. They had tried to jam them days ago, but now they realized those signals were never meant to be stopped. They were bait. The alien fleet had been following fake trails while real human operations happened under their noses. Every landing zone they had created was already mapped, infiltrated, and turned into traps. The alien commander gathered his top officers in the strategy room. The walls hummed with the sound of the engines, but no one spoke. They all stared at the map, watching their own forces being slowly erased like sand being washed away by the tide. "This isn't war," one officer finally said in a broken voice. "This is extermination." Another officer argued they should bring down orbital fire and burn entire cities. But the commander shook his head slowly. "And where will they be when we burn?" he asked. "We still can't even find them." That was the truth. They couldn't bomb what they couldn't see. On the ground, more alien soldiers broke. Some fired wildly into the shadows, hitting nothing. Some ran from their posts and disappeared into the night. Fear spread through their ranks faster than any weapon. Their chain of command cracked. Officers barked orders, but their voices didn't stop the trembling in their soldiers' hands. Every broken window looked like a sniper's nest. Every sewer cover felt like a tunnel for death. Their scanners gave false readings, flashing red where there was nothing, and missing the humans that were actually moving. In a dark underground control center, human commanders watched everything unfold through old satellites and hardwired networks. Their plan was working perfectly. They didn't need big battles. They didn't need to face the aliens head-on. All they needed was time. Humanity had studied war for centuries. They had bled in it, drowned in it. They had learned to be the patient predator, not the loud one. And now, that patience was cutting the invaders apart piece by piece. At midnight, the alien commander made a desperate decision. He ordered a massive regrouping of forces toward the largest landing zone. Thousands of soldiers began moving at once, forming convoys across highways, fields, and mountains. But what he didn't know was that every inch of those routes had already been marked by human scouts. As the convoys rolled forward, explosions ripped through bridges, fuel lines burst into flames, and armored transports vanished into black holes dug into the ground. Snipers hit their lead vehicles. Drones fell from the sky. Communications snapped like dry twigs. The regrouping turned into a slaughter before they even reached the halfway point. From his warship, the commander watched as the red dots on the map disappeared one after another. His jaw tightened, his claws digging into the table. "How?" he growled. "How are they doing this?" The officer next to him whispered, "This is their world." And that truth sank deep into the commander's chest like a blade. He realized that no matter how many ships they had, no matter how much firepower they brought, they were not fighting a weak enemy. They were fighting something far older and far more dangerous, a species that had survived its own chaos and learned how to turn its home into a living weapon. In the darkness of the forest near one of the destroyed convoys, a human soldier whispered into a radio, "Phase 2 is complete." Another voice answered quietly, "Good. Make them bleed." There was no shouting, no celebration, just quiet determination. Humanity didn't need to roar. They let the world itself do the talking. As the fourth night came to an end, the alien commander stood alone at the observation window of his ship. Below him, Earth rotated slowly, beautiful and silent. It looked harmless from up here, but he finally understood what the reports meant, what his disappearing soldiers meant, what this silence really was. This wasn't a conquest. This was a death sentence they had written themselves the moment they set foot on the planet. The humans weren't just resisting, they were waiting, and he had just realized that the nightmare had only begun. The fifth night did not begin with gunfire. It began with silence, the kind of silence that sits deep in the bones and whispers that something is coming. The alien fleet hung in orbit like a chain of burning knives, but the fire in their voices had vanished. In the war room aboard the flagship, the commander leaned over the hollow map of Earth, and what he saw made his chest tighten. More red markers were gone. Patrol routes had collapsed. Bases had gone dark. The proud invasion that was supposed to be their fastest victory had turned into a graveyard of signals and unanswered calls. None of their technology mattered anymore. None of their plans worked. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. Humanity was erasing them, quietly, methodically, like someone peeling layers from a trapped animal. Down on the surface, the fog rolled through the ruins of the cities like smoke from an invisible fire. Alien soldiers patrolled in tight groups, their weapons up, their voices low. They had stopped laughing days ago. Now every step they took felt heavier than the last. They moved like prey pretending to be predators. The human cities they had once mocked as soft were now killing grounds. Every alley felt like a trap. Every shadow carried weight. They had learned the hard way that this wasn't a war they understood. They were invaders on a planet that didn't forgive trespassers. An alien squad moved cautiously through what was once a major industrial district. Their scanners kept flickering with heat signatures that disappeared before they could pinpoint them. Their captain barked for them to stay alert. They reached a warehouse at the edge of the district, its massive doors hanging open like a dark mouth. 2 soldiers went inside to check. 30 seconds later, the comms went silent. No screams, no shots, just silence. The captain called their names again and again, but there was no answer. The rest of the squad moved in, weapons ready. The moment they crossed the threshold, the lights cut out. They fired wildly into the dark. Something moved fast. A figure dropped from above and dragged one of them away without a sound. Another vanished behind a stack of crates. The last few soldiers tried to retreat, but by the time they reached the exit, the door was already closed. When the alien command center tried to contact that squad, there was no response. Another red marker on their map disappeared. One officer whispered to another that humans were not fighting like any enemy they had faced before. They didn't defend their world with walls and shields. They defended it with shadows, with patience, with silence. At the same time, on the other side of the planet, a massive alien supply convoy was making its way through an abandoned highway. It stretched for kilometers, vehicles, tanks, troop carriers, ammunition haulers. The commanders believed a larger force might finally intimidate the humans into showing themselves. But the humans didn't need to show themselves. They had already prepared the road days earlier. When the convoy reached the center of a narrow bridge, the ground beneath them exploded in perfect sequence. The bridge cracked and groaned, splitting like a wound. Vehicles plunged into the dark water below. Snipers hidden on cliffs fired at the lead trucks, cutting off any chance of retreat. Drones swarmed in from the treeline, silent as death, cutting their communications and disabling their systems. By the time the smoke cleared, the entire convoy was nothing but wreckage and bodies. The humans vanished again before reinforcements arrived. In the war room, the alien commander slammed his hand against the table. His officers didn't speak. They didn't need to. They could all see it now. The humans were everywhere. Every street, every forest, every ocean. Every attempt to regroup was being dismantled before it could even begin. Their technology was useless against an enemy that never stayed still. "We are not fighting soldiers," one of the officers whispered. "We are fighting ghosts." The commander bared his sharp teeth in anger, but deep down, the The cold truth had already taken root in his chest. They had come to Earth thinking they were predators. But they had walked into a trap designed by apex hunters. On the ground, alien soldiers began turning on each other. Panic spread through the ranks like wildfire. Soldiers abandoned their posts, vehicles were left behind, and communication lines became a mess of desperate voices. "They're everywhere," one soldier screamed through the comms. "I saw their eyes in the dark." Another begged for air support, but the ships in orbit were already stretched thin, trying to protect their own positions. That night, human forces made their first open move. Not a massive attack, but enough to break whatever fragile confidence the invaders had left. In 3 major cities, coordinated explosions erupted at the same second, lighting up the night sky. Fuel depots burned. Ammunition caches turned into fireballs. Drone towers fell like dying beasts. For the first time since the invasion began, the aliens heard the sound of human war horns echoing through the ruins. Not a surrender. Promise. Inside one of the burning cities, a group of alien soldiers saw something that made their blood freeze. From the smoke, a line of human soldiers emerged wearing black combat gear, their faces streaked with ash, their weapons steady, their movements silent and precise. They didn't run. They didn't scream. They moved forward with calm, cold focus, their boots crunching over the broken ground like they had done this 1,000 times before. The aliens opened fire. The humans scattered into cover with perfect coordination, answering with clean, surgical shots. It wasn't a battle. It was a hunt, and the humans were the hunters. Up in orbit, the alien commander watched the live feeds as more of his ground forces were wiped out. He saw a squad of human operatives infiltrate one of their anti-air positions, take it apart from the inside, and walk away before anyone could react. He saw drones vanish from the sky. He saw the map of Earth bleeding red, not with human deaths, but with the deaths of his own army. His hands clenched, and for the first time, there was something in his eyes he had never felt before: real fear. On the ground, alien soldiers tried to fortify their positions, but the humans didn't attack walls, they slipped through cracks. They didn't charge straight, they came from below, from above, from everywhere. They cut off supply lines like surgeons cutting veins. And every time the aliens thought they had cornered them, the humans were already gone. At dawn, the sky was filled with black smoke from burning alien machinery. Human resistance banners appeared across several cities overnight. They had been waiting, building their strength, gathering every piece of information. This wasn't the beginning of their war. It was the turning point. Humanity wasn't surviving anymore. Humanity was striking back. The alien commander stood before the observation window, his hands pressed against the cold glass as he stared at the burning planet below. For the first time since the invasion began, he realized something brutal. It wasn't that they were losing control. It was that they had never had control to begin with. They had walked into humanity's home thinking it was theirs for the taking. They didn't know that Deathworlds don't forgive arrogance. And they didn't know that humans, when cornered, don't retreat. They turn into something unstoppable. The commander whispered the words under his breath. Words he never thought he would say. We should never have come here. But it was too late. Humanity had risen from the shadows, and the invaders were standing in the middle of a storm they could no longer escape. The hunters had arrived, and the prey was them. The 6th night was nothing like the ones before it. The sky above Earth burned with streaks of falling debris, shattered remains of alien ships that had once blocked out the stars. Fires spread across cities and forests alike, the smoke rising like black claws into the atmosphere. The alien invasion force, once a wall of unstoppable might, was now fractured. Their formations were broken, their morale gutted, their commanders exhausted and desperate. In the war room aboard the flagship, the alien commander stared at the holomap and saw chaos where order used to be. Entire units were gone. Convoys wiped out. Landing zones burned to ash. His second-in-command stood silently beside him, helmet tucked under one arm, trying not to show the fear in his eyes. We're losing everything, he whispered. And it was true. On the surface, the humans no longer moved like shadows, they moved like a storm. For weeks, They had stayed silent, hunting the invaders in the dark, striking only when it hurt the most. But now their traps had closed. Armored human vehicles rolled out of hidden bunkers that the aliens never even knew existed. Massive missile platforms rose from underground silos, hidden beneath farmland and city blocks. Fighter jets, silent for days, suddenly streaked across the sky, launching precise strikes that tore through alien strongholds like knives through glass. The world that the aliens thought was conquered was, in truth, fully armed and awake. An alien garrison stationed near an old harbor woke up to the sound of sirens screaming across their comms. The night exploded with blinding white light as human artillery rained down from unseen positions miles away. Alien soldiers stumbled out of their barracks, half-armored, shouting into radios that no longer connected to anyone. They fired into the fog out of panic, not knowing where the humans were. But the humans were already inside. Strike teams in dark combat suits slipped through the smoke like ghosts. They moved with terrifying precision, cutting off power, hacking alien comms, and dismantling defenses like they were peeling the skin off their prey. When the sun rose over the harbor, nothing remained but burning ships and alien corpses floating in the dark water. At the same time, on the other side of the planet, an alien command post inside a skyscraper found itself under siege. Not from tanks or heavy weapons, but from silence itself. The lights went out one floor at a time. Gunfire echoed from stairwells, then stopped abruptly. A commander screamed orders to hold positions, but no one answered. When he checked the security cameras, all he saw was darkness and the occasional flicker of movement. Human shapes moving floor to floor, clearing the building without hesitation. They weren't just attacking, they were dismantling. By the time alien reinforcements arrived, the building was already lost. In orbit, the alien fleet fared no better. Human stealth ships rose from the oceans like black blades, striking hard and disappearing before the fleet could respond. Orbital defense cannons hidden in remote mountain ranges tore through alien cruisers. The fleet that once surrounded the planet like a noose was now scattered and bleeding. Commanders screamed at each other across fractured communication lines, their voices thick with panic. "Where are they coming from?" one officer shouted. "Everywhere," another answered. "They're everywhere." The alien commander tried to regain control. He ordered a full planetary bombardment on major human cities. But when the fleet prepared to fire, they were met with a storm of counterfire from ground-based defenses they didn't know existed. Human railguns and orbital disruptors lit up the sky, cutting through their formation like lightning through dry wood. Explosions bloomed across space as alien warships split open, spilling fire and twisted metal. One by one, the commanders realized the unthinkable: they were outgunned. Not because humans had bigger ships, but because humans had been waiting for this. They hadn't hidden out of fear. They had hidden to lure the invaders in. Down on the ground, alien soldiers abandoned their positions and ran. Some tried to regroup, but everywhere they went, they found roads blocked, convoys destroyed, cities under human control. Others tried to flee to their landing zones, but the humans were already there. They had turned every exit into a grave. One alien squad reached what they thought was an untouched outpost, only to find human flags already flying over it. They dropped their weapons and backed away slowly, their hands trembling. In the middle of this chaos, the alien commander stood at the center of the war room, his hands gripping the console so tightly that the metal creaked. His officers were shouting over each other, begging for orders, but he couldn't speak. For the first time, the silence wasn't just around him. It was inside him. A sharp voice finally broke through. "Sir, if we don't retreat now, we'll be wiped out completely." He turned to look at his second-in-command, and in that moment, he saw the fear that no one could hide anymore. They had underestimated the humans. They had thought Earth would be easy. They were wrong. Humanity moved like a beast finally waking up. Every forest became a kill zone. Every ruined city became a fortress. Every piece of land the aliens stepped on turned into their own trap. Human forces weren't scattered anymore. They were everywhere. An endless tide of fighters, tanks, artillery, drones, and ships rising from places the aliens didn't even know existed. The humans had let them walk deeper and deeper into the cage, and now they were closing it shut. On a ruined battlefield near what used to be a landing zone, an alien officer dropped to his knees. His unit had been wiped out by a single coordinated strike from humans they never even saw. He stared at the burning remains of their ships and whispered, "They were waiting for us." He wasn't wrong. Humanity had spent its entire history preparing for war. Not against the specific enemy, but against anything. They had fought themselves for centuries, hardened themselves through fire, and now the invaders were learning what a death world truly meant. The alien commander gave the retreat order at last, but it was already too late. Their ships were being torn apart in orbit. Their forces on the ground were surrounded or dead. Some soldiers threw down their weapons, trying to surrender. Others ran into the night, knowing they wouldn't survive. The humans didn't need to chase them. The planet itself was doing that for them. At dawn, the skies above Earth burned red from the flames of falling alien warships. Cities echoed with the sound of human soldiers marching openly through streets they had once silently defended. Humanity had stopped hiding. The storm they had unleashed was absolute. Every alien who remained on the surface felt it in their bones. They weren't the conquerors anymore. They were survivors, barely. On the flagship, the commander watched as his fleet disintegrated on the screens. He couldn't hear the explosions, but he felt them like punches in his chest. The words slipped from his mouth like ash. This planet is a nightmare. He had thought those stories about Deathworlds were myths, but now he understood. This wasn't just a world with dangerous wildlife or harsh conditions. This was a world with humans. And humans didn't just survive nightmares, they became them. In the forests, in the cities, in the oceans, and in the sky, Earth roared back at its invaders without mercy. The time for hiding was over. The time for hunters had come. And the aliens were already bleeding out in the jaws of a world they should have never touched. The seventh night was not silent anymore. It roared with the sound of falling warships, burning skies, and the unstoppable advance of humanity. What began as a proud invasion had turned into a slow massacre. The alien fleet that once darkened the orbit was in flames. Wreckage drifted like broken bones above the blue and green world they had mocked only days ago. Below, the surface of Earth had become a battlefield where the invaders no longer hunted. They were being hunted. Their commanders could no longer speak with certainty. Their soldiers no longer marched with confidence. Every heartbeat of the planet pulsed with human fury. The alien commander stood in the war room, staring at the holomap that once gave him power. Now it only showed ruin. Red markers, his forces, had been almost completely erased. The few remaining units were scattered, broken, begging for extraction that would never come. The map of Earth was lit with human positions. Artillery networks, armored divisions, stealth ships rising from oceans, drones swarming the skies like a living storm. The commander's hands trembled as he gripped the edges of the table. His war council had no strategy left. Every plan they made was crushed before it even began. "We underestimated them," one officer whispered. "No," the commander growled, his voice shaking. "We didn't underestimate them. We didn't understand them at all." Down on the ground, alien survivors ran through ruins that used to be cities they thought they owned. The streets were filled with smoke and flame. Human banners hung from half-destroyed buildings like quiet warnings. Sniper fire cracked through the air with deadly precision. Every shadow held danger. Every corner could mean death. The aliens tried to regroup at landing zones, but they found nothing waiting except twisted metal and fire. The humans had struck those zones first, knowing exactly where the invaders would run when the tide turned. One group of alien soldiers stumbled into a wide-open street in a shattered metropolis. The pavement was cracked, the buildings around them gutted. They thought they were alone. Then the ground beneath them shook. From the distance came the slow, thundering sound of engines. They turned and saw human armor rolling through the smoke, black tanks with cannons glowing like the eyes of something alive. Human infantry moved alongside them, quiet, steady, relentless. They didn't yell or boast. They didn't need to. The sound of their approach was enough. The aliens opened fire in panic, spraying energy bolts at the advancing line. The humans didn't flinch. Their armor absorbed the shots, their tanks returned fire with precision. The aliens screamed and scattered, but there was nowhere to run. The humans closed in like the tide swallowing the shore. In another sector, deep in a forest that had once hidden human strike teams, the last remnants of an alien battalion tried to dig in. They built makeshift barricades, set up defense cannons, and hoped to hold out until reinforcements came. But no reinforcements were coming. Instead, the forest came alive around them. Human drones, camouflaged like shadows, swarmed the treetops. The trees themselves shook as artillery shells rained down. When the alien soldiers returned fire, they hit nothing. The humans didn't attack in a single wave, they attacked from every angle at once. The forest turned into their grave before they even realized they'd been surrounded. Up in orbit, the last alien ships tried to pull away from the planet, engines burning bright as they attempted to flee. But Earth would not let them go so easily. Human stealth ships uncloaked in perfect formation, cutting across their escape routes like wolves circling a dying animal. Missiles and railgun fire streaked through the darkness. One alien cruiser exploded into a silent ball of light. Another was split in half by a rail shot from the surface, its pieces tumbling into the atmosphere like falling stars. There was no more retreat. There was only collapse. The alien commander received frantic reports from what little remained of his army. "We are surrounded," one screamed. "They're in the air and underground," shouted another. "We can't fight them, they're everywhere." The commander's mind felt like ice cracking under weight. He remembered how easy this invasion was supposed to be. He remembered the laughter of his officers, the way they had called humanity soft, weak, pathetic. But now, standing in a dark war room with alarms wailing around him, he understood the truth. This was not weakness. This was a species that had been preparing for centuries. Not because they expected mercy, but because they never believed in it. On the ground, human forces moved through the night like an iron wave. They weren't reckless. They weren't even rushing. They moved with the quiet certainty of predators finishing the hunt. The aliens could hear them before they saw them. The thump of boots, the rumble of tanks, the faint buzz of drones overhead. Those sounds used to terrify humans in stories of alien invasions. Now they terrified the invaders themselves. One alien lieutenant, wounded and alone, crawled behind a wrecked transport. He pressed his back against the burning hull and gasped for air. Through the smoke, he saw them. A line of human soldiers moving in formation, their faces hard, their movements like clockwork. They didn't shout, they didn't laugh. They didn't even look tired. They looked inevitable. The lieutenant raised his weapon with trembling hands, fired once, and missed. The humans didn't even slow down. A single clean shot ended it. The alien commander's last desperate attempt to contact his home world went unanswered. The long-range comm relays had been destroyed days ago, and he hadn't even noticed. He was alone, trapped in orbit above a planet that was tearing his army apart piece by piece. His second-in-command finally spoke what everyone was thinking. "We should have never set foot here." The commander's voice was a whisper. "We were warned," he said almost to himself. "They called it a Deathworld. We thought they were exaggerating." Down below, humanity's forces swept through the remains of the invasion. Cities burned, yes, but they burned with human banners flying overhead. Every surviving alien outpost fell like a stone thrown into the sea. The humans didn't celebrate. They didn't dance or sing. They moved forward, finishing the work. In the final hours of that night, the alien commander watched as his last ship was hit. The shockwave threw him to the floor. His officers screamed, alarms blared, and a fire erupted inside the war room. As he dragged himself up, the planet filled the window in front of him. Blue, green, beautiful, deadly. He had thought this was just another conquest. But it was never a conquest. It was a mistake, a fatal one. On the ground, human soldiers planted their flags across what was once enemy territory. They didn't need words to mark their victory. The silence spoke louder than any anthem. They had taken back their world, not with mercy, but with the cold, quiet strength of a species that had been forged in its own chaos. The alien commander closed his eyes as the hull around him cracked and fire filled the bridge. The last thought that passed through his mind was not about his army or his failure. It was about the name they had mocked. Deathworld. Now he understood why no one ever invaded one twice. Outside, the flames swallowed the last of his fleet. On the ground, humanity stood unbroken. The hunt was over. The invaders were nothing but a story that would be told for generations. A story of those who came to conquer and learned too late what humanity really was. The eighth and final night of the invasion arrived like a heavy storm that had already decided its winner. The sky was no longer filled with alien warships. It was filled with burning metal falling back to Earth like dying stars. The once proud fleet that had arrived in perfect formation was nothing but wreckage scattered across the atmosphere. Alien soldiers who had landed with arrogance now crawled through ruins, broken, hunted, and terrified. Humanity had risen from the shadows, and now they stood over the battlefield not as survivors, but as victors. The war the aliens thought they would win easily had ended in a way they could never have imagined. The alien commander sat slumped against the cracked wall of the burning bridge of his flagship. Alarms screamed through the corridors. The entire ship shuddered as another railgun shell from the surface ripped through its hull. He looked up at the wide viewing window, his breathing shallow. His chest burned with the sting of defeat. Earth filled the glass. Blue, green, cold, and merciless. He had stared at it before with a hunter's gaze. Now it stared back at him like a beast watching its prey die. He had ignored the warnings. He had believed the stories of Deathworlds were exaggerated myths told by weaker species. But the screams echoing through the halls of his ship were no myth. They were proof. On the surface, the last remaining alien units tried to form a line outside what was once their largest landing zone. The ground shook as human tanks and armored vehicles rolled forward in the dark. The air was thick with smoke, the smell of burning metal, and the faint, steady rhythm of boots. The aliens fired their weapons desperately into the night, their once disciplined formation shattered by weeks of fear. They saw nothing clearly anymore. Only shadows moving through the fog, flashes of human figures, drones circling above like vultures. One alien officer screamed for backup, but the signal died before the words were even finished. The humans had jammed everything. There was no help coming. A wall of explosions erupted behind them as human artillery pounded their positions with terrifying precision. The alien soldiers broke and ran, stumbling over the wreckage of their own machines. Some tried to surrender, dropping their weapons and raising their hands, but no one came to collect them. The humans moved with a cold, silent efficiency. Strike teams slipped through the chaos like wolves among panicked prey. Every move was calculated, every bullet placed with precision. There were no speeches, no mercy, just the inevitable weight of a war they had already won. In the ruins of an old city, a group of alien survivors huddled in the basement of a collapsed building. They could hear human boots above them, steady and slow. They whispered to each other in panic, their voices trembling. One of them said humanity wasn't fighting like an army, they were fighting like a planet. Another said it was as if the world itself had turned against them. And maybe it had. On a death world, nothing forgives arrogance. Not the land, not the creatures, and not the humans. Above their heads, human soldiers swept through the building with night vision goggles, rifles raised, faces painted black with ash and dirt. They moved with no sound, only the faint click of boots on broken floor. One soldier dropped a flash charge through a hole in the ceiling. The aliens screamed when it exploded, blinding and deafening them. By the time their vision returned, the humans were already inside. The aliens raised their hands in surrender. The humans didn't speak. They simply pulled the commander out, zip-tied the survivors, and moved on. This was not a negotiation. This was cleanup. Across the world, similar scenes played out like falling dominoes. In forests, alien squads were cornered by sniper fire they could never trace. In deserts, their vehicles burned under human missiles launched from hundreds of kilometers away. In the mountains, their commanders were dragged out of caves where they had tried to hide. The human counterattack was everywhere, coordinated, surgical, unstoppable. For the aliens, there was no safe place anymore. Not in the sky, not on the ground, not in the shadows. Back in orbit, the alien commander's flagship was breaking apart piece by piece. Emergency lights flashed red across the bridge. Officers shouted orders that no one followed anymore. The escape pods had either been destroyed or locked down by human sabotage. He dragged himself toward the viewing window and placed his hand against the glass. The planet below looked peaceful from this height, almost beautiful. But he knew better now. Under those forests and oceans, in those silent cities, was a force that could not be conquered. A species that turned war into something far more terrifying than any empire had faced. He thought about the first day, the arrogance in their laughter, the pride in their march, the certainty in their victory. Now there was only one thought left in his mind, heavy and bitter. They had been wrong, deadly wrong. They had thought they were stepping on weak soil. Instead, they had stepped on the chest of a sleeping predator. And that predator had opened its eyes. On the ground, human forces surrounded the last alien outpost. It was nothing more than a crater filled with wounded soldiers and burning transports. The humans advanced like a black tide. Tanks in front, drones above, infantry behind. The aliens had no weapons left. Some fired anyway, out of panic, their bolts scattering harmlessly against human armor. The return fire was swift and final. Within minutes, the outpost was silent. Every screen aboard the flagship went black one after another, each symbolizing the fall of another alien position. When the last one disappeared, the commander let out a low, broken laugh. "A Class 15 Deathworld," he whispered to no one. "We should have listened." The deck beneath him rumbled as the final barrage from the surface tore through the ship's hull. He closed his eyes as the cold vacuum swallowed the bridge. On the ground, humanity stood united. Soldiers raised their rifles into the air, not in celebration but in silent acknowledgement. They had bled, they had waited, and they had won. The cities would rebuild. The forests would heal. But the invaders would never forget this lesson. Across the galaxy, their disappearance would be spoken about in hushed voices. The warning would spread to every corner of space. Do not invade a death world. Do not challenge humanity. Because humanity doesn't bow. Humanity doesn't run. Humanity doesn't beg. It waits. It watches. And when the time comes, it strikes like a storm no one can survive. The war was over. The aliens were gone. Earth belonged to its people as it always had. Above the planet, the last burning wreck of the alien flagship fell through the atmosphere like a dying star. Below, humanity watched without fear. The sky belonged to them again. The world exhaled. And in the silence that followed, a single truth remained. Those who come to take Earth will never leave it the same. Some worlds fight for survival. But a death world? It hunts. It kills. And it remembers.